right, welcome everyone. Want to do a quick sound check. Can folks on Zoom, can you hear us okay? You can give a thumbs up or just a quick note in the chat. Good. All right. Looks like we got a thumbs up. Welcome, everyone. My name is Sarah. I am the Senior Director of Resource Development at Forward Through Ferguson. I want to thank you all for being here. Those in person, thank you for bracing the cold and making it here with us. And those on Zoom, also want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to be with us today. We really appreciate it. We have some new folks who are in the space with us today and those who are familiar with FTF. So we will be sharing a bit about who we are, our impact this year, and then our plans for next year. We will have an opportunity for some question and answer at the end. If you're on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature or just come off mute. And those in person will also have a handheld mic going around just so that the folks on Zoom can hear your questions as well. So we will be going through each of our strategic pillars: building racial equity, capacity, and community partnerships, policy and data, storytelling and communications. Oh, thank you. And justice philanthropy. We do have one more strategic pillar not listed, which is our coalition support, which you will hear about under policy and data today. So with that, I will be passing it on to introducing our team. So FTF staff members, if you all want to make it up towards the front and be kind of center so people can see you, and followed by our staff introductions, Anissa will be leading us for the rest of the discussion this morning or this afternoon. All right, so I will pass it on to Spencer first.
Surprise, surprise. Good afternoon. My name is Spencer Dunlap, and I'm Senior Director of Operations with Forward Through Ferguson.
Hey, everybody. My name is Madhav Narayan. I'm Senior Director of Policy and Data here at FTF. Good to be here.
Down this way.
Hello, my name is Jalian Yang. Pronouns are she and they. I'm the Senior Director of Storytelling and Communications. I also wanted to welcome the people online into the room and just mention that we were chatting about how we're going to rest and slow down this season. We've got hanging out by the fireplace, reading books, making puzzles, and baking.
I'm all for the baking. Good afternoon. My name is Anissa McCaskill. I am Executive Director on the Forward Through Ferguson team. We're messing around with the camera right behind you guys, so trying to make sure that we can all be seen. And so with that, I guess we'll get started on who we are and our mission. So we are Forward Through Ferguson, and our mission is, thank you guys. Our mission is that we center impacted communities and mobilize accountable bodies. What does that mean? You know, we came out of the Ferguson uprising and there was a necessity coming from that space to actually hold the center. You had the folks who were the boots on the ground. You had the folks who were in seats of power. Who sits at that intersection? Thank you. Sorry, who sits at that intersection of the two to provide a bridge? And so when the Ferguson Commission sunset itself, there was a request and funding for the creation of an organization, which is Forward Through Ferguson. Our vision is that we envision a transformed St. Louis region where, regardless of race and zip code, there is justice for all. We'll do this. There is justice for all, an opportunity to thrive, and the boundless possibility for our youth. I'm a parent of a 21-year-old, so he was 10 when the Ferguson uprising occurred. There's a lot of things that we had to question, we had to answer to, because in the end, that uprising that rippled over to the rest of us was really a reaction of youth to the things that they were seeing that we had been ignoring that were impacting them. It made us open our eyes. And so we always reference the boundless possibility of our youth, because we know that in the end, everything that we're doing is going to impact the generations to come. And now we're going to be getting into our impact for 2025. I'm going to be covering building racial equity, capacity, and community partnerships. And you see a number of different logos. And the reason why those logos are there is those represent different partnerships, different places in which we have found space in the last year. One of those things that we're very proud of is that we developed an Opportunity to Thrive community of practice in partnership with BioSTL and James S. McDonald Foundation of 30 participants. These are all organizations that receive funding from J.S. McDonald through BioSTL within the area of neurodiversity, STEM science field that typically maybe don't have the opportunity to do the type of professional development where they can come together and allow iron to sharpen iron. So in this space, they're able to walk through the challenges, they're able to get some good resources. We also are serving on the committee of the Inclusive Prosperity Partnership with the McDonald Foundation, which is an initiative that you'll hear more about next year, but looking to invest through community and through different organizations, $30 million over a 10-year cycle, first starting right now with workforce development, then we'll be cycling into early childhood development and education, followed by affordable housing over that 10-year span. Next is the Leading On Opportunity Conference in Charlotte. Very interesting thing about Charlotte, North Carolina. About 5 years ago, they were ranked 48th in the country in terms of economic mobility. Looking at all of the things that we're now looking at with the Inclusive Prosperity Partnership in St. Louis. In the period of time, basically from the pandemic till now, they've been able to go from 48th to 32nd in the United States in terms of economic mobility. What did they do? They actually had conversations where they called the thing the thing. They talked about the race wealth gap. They talked about the necessity of really investing and making sure that our schools are solid. They talked about the investment that corporate America needs to make in order to make sure that there is housing, that there is education, that there is mobility within their corporations. And also, are the requirements that we have in workforce development for certain positions really necessary? Or are they just another layer of barriers that we've created to keep people from being able to progress? So went to Charlotte, was able to sit at their feet. And then they were recently in St. Louis giving some more lessons learned, because what they're doing informs the work of this initiative that the J.S. McDonald Foundation has convened. Additionally, in terms of building racial equity capacity partnerships, I literally had this Zoom at 2:00 today. So the St. Louis Regional Response Team had created a food insecurity fund to address what was happening with SNAP recently. There were a lot of convenings and conversations and people sitting around tables, but they already were kind of set up to be able to get the fund up, get the money, get it out. And so with about 8 other partner organizations, we've been able to sit at that table. You see the logos right there. These were like the first ones to jump onto it, but there are several others that also are participating in this initiative. And with that, we've been able to push out so far, since I'd say the second week of November, we're about $51,000. There's additional monies that we are expecting to come through as well. We just did a vote today for an additional 20. So by the end of next week, that's $71,000 that's been pushed out to organizations that typically are locked out of the philanthropy sector and also sometimes don't know what they have to do in terms of reporting. There's no reporting necessary. Can you get people fed, and can you get them fed quickly? Are there resources that you need as an organization? Do you need rent money? Do you need money for gas to drive and drop things off? This fund allows for that type of funding, whereas some of the other resources that were made available do not. And now the Public Health Roundtable, which is part of this last sector of what we're going to be talking about in this section. We had a 1-year engagement with the St. Louis City Department of Health. I think most of you are familiar with their community health improvement plan, but some of the things that they were doing in that space was self-evaluation of, do we have implicit bias in the way that we are managing healthcare in the city of St. Louis? What are the barriers we have in understanding and being a part of the community that we are trying to serve? And of course, a lot of that happened under the leadership of their former executive director, who was very hands-on and present during the process. The process was twofold. We had professional development on health equity concepts. We had monthly leadership meetings, but we also met with full staff as well. We touched the entire staff with the understanding that by the end of this process, there would be a greater understanding as well as a self-evaluation, which they completed on their own. We were able to give them that information back and give them some tools that they could go back to use and to implement more fully the CHIP, as well as to make a difference in the way that they maneuver through the St. Louis ecosystem. And with that, I'll hand it over to Mada for policy and data.
Hello. So this year, we did a lot of work with our first, excuse me, our first responder alternative coalition. We met several times with them this year to discuss different FRA models that could benefit the STL region. If you're unfamiliar, first responder alternative is a program that essentially works to create alternative first response, as it sounds in the name, that takes folks and make sure that they're getting the services they need when they're calling 911 or emergency response, and lowers the risk or incidence of police inclusion when they don't need to be included. Excuse me. Examples include the Denver Star program and then the Albuquerque Community Safety Department, to name a few. We actually met with a couple of those folks who are keeping those FRA models going in their respective communities on what worked and what didn't. And we took that learning to apply to a framework for what a pilot could look like for an FRA model in the St. Louis region. So the FRA coalition members that we had coming to the table include Conflict Resolution Center, Equal Justice USA, City of Maplewood, St. Louis County Beyond Housing, the St. Louis Violence Prevention Commission, and more. And in pursuit of creating something that is truly representative of and helpful to the St. Louis region, we are currently canvassing in North County to gauge resident experiences around emergency response and their thoughts on the different FRA models that we've researched and which ones they think could or couldn't benefit their communities. And we're hoping to utilize that survey data to draft an advocacy plan for that pilot. The other big thing that we have been doing this year is a 10-year look back in partnership with the Urban Institute that will be released in Q1 of 2026. And that report basically looks at the 10 years since the Ferguson Commission was convened to do its work. That will include key informant interviews with several of the Ferguson commissioners themselves, practitioners who are doing racial equity work throughout the region, invited essays, as well as canvassing data that we collected by engaging with folks in St. Louis City and St. Louis County on their thoughts on the Ferguson Commission, the report, and what progress they feel has or hasn't been made in the last 10 years. There will also be places that we have identified where further work needs to be done and calls to action on those. The other thing that we're working on as we wrap up the year is a write-up of the hashtag Transforming 911 City data. If you're unfamiliar, several copies of the report for those in the room are out on the table. And for those on Zoom, you can check out transforming911.org. But the initial Transforming 911 report was one that we put out a couple of years ago, analyzing over 1.7 million calls made to St. Louis County Police Department over a 5-year time span. And then this report is a follow-up looking at city data gathered between 2017 and 2019. Basically just looking at the highlights of what that data is telling us about how people are utilizing 911. Does it fit the narratives that we are told about 911, and so on and so forth. And with that, I will move it on to storytelling and comms.
Hi, everyone. Thanks again so much for coming. As you might have seen, I am documenting a little bit of this event. So if you have an issue with that, please chat with me and we will keep things private. So moving on, like Madhav mentioned, we are going to be drafting a Transforming 911 City Data write-up. Age Datalytics, which is the same firm that worked with us to analyze the St. Louis County data lens cap. It helped us analyze over 1.3 million 911 calls made between 2017 and 2019 to the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. And so one of the big takeaways from this is that we do need updated data. It's already out of date because of the pandemic, because of the tornado, and so many more things. We are in unprecedented economic times. And so there are so many changes that have taken place, including the implementation of next generation 911 in some areas, as well as the building of a dispatch center in St. Louis City to come. So just a sneak peek of some of this data. We're not really going to get too much into it, but I just wanted to share with you all, since you came to this update, just to be anticipatory of the work that's to come, that's going to come out. But something that we found is that most calls for service are by police officers. And so what that means is that when we're analyzing the 911 data, a lot of it is, for example, police officers needing to call for backup. And as we know, almost pretty much 100% of the time when people call 911, it's a police officer coming. And something that we're asking ourselves over and over again is, does that match up with what the residents actually want and need? And a lot of the times that's not necessarily the case. You don't always need an armed police officer to come out. And so what was interesting was that 2.8% of those calls were by residences. And so we have some information about what those calls are about. Almost half of them are for disturbances, so maybe noise or someone wandering. Someone feels like unsettled about something that's happening and they're calling for someone else to investigate that. And I think for us who are community minded, we are thinking about, what does it mean for a community resident to be able to respond to those things? We also found differences in terms of 911 response times. So they're the slowest in Riverview, Skinker de Bolivar, and Vanderveer, and then fastest in Botanical Gardens, Northampton, and Southwest Garden by minutes. And I see some shaking heads, and some of you may have been to our First Responder Alternative Coalition meetings, and you're familiar with the county data, but to have specifics on the city data, I think is important too, because one of the most frequent questions that we get whenever we do community events around transforming 911 is, what do you know about the neighborhoods? What do they need that's different from each other? And what do they experience that's different from each other? And so that also translates into the time that police officers spend on things. And so when it comes to these 911 calls, a third of their time is for those disturbances that we mentioned, but a lot of them aren't for what the FBI would call crimes. And so that might be disturbance, missing person, escaped animal, or even miscellaneous. They might be doing admin work, they might just be patrolling around or transporting someone who's being incarcerated. As I mentioned, the investigation of what's going on is over a third. So that's like a person or an object. And as we know, that can be a place where bias creeps in. So when someone's investigating, let's say, a young person, that doesn't necessarily mean that the young person is up to no good. It just means that someone's called for that. So moving on to the more communication side of things, we've been expanding our reach through short form video. One of our funders was able to support me in attending a short form video apprenticeship. And so we've been experimenting with that. We were in a wonderful cohort with staff from Action St. Louis and Arch City Defenders. So it was really special to have people across the nation participating, but having such a strong presence in St. Louis. So if you've noticed, some of these organizations have really leveled up. It's partly because of this experience. So what we learned also from experimenting with short form video is that most people who view our reels on Instagram, which a lot of people have never followed us before. So when you're using video, you can reach people who would never have thought of Forward Through Ferguson or don't even know it exists. So there were a variety of videos that we did on that. And then here's some press highlights. Some of them have to do with being seen as an expert on what should change about 911. Some of it has to do with the St. Louis Racial Equity Summit. Raise your hand if you attended. Woohoo, amazing. So it's so unique that we are able to learn from each other and wisdom from people in St. Louis about how to move forward, especially in this time when there are people who want to say, shh, equity, don't say it, you know? But we're here speaking it and saying it's important still. And also Anissa went on St. Louis Public Radio, just talking about how much work there is to do 10 years after the Ferguson Commission report. And it's also been 10 years since Forward Through Ferguson was created. And towards the end of our presentation, we'll be talking about what's next for the organization and how you can plug in to move our region forward.
Thank you, Ja. So the next segment that we're going to be moving into is our Pillar of Justice Philanthropy. A lot of people may or may not know that Forward Through Ferguson was the project manager, for lack of better terminology, or managed the programming for the Racial Healing and Justice Fund, which was in relationship with the Deaconess Foundation during the racial equity summit, we actually had two things that occurred. We hosted a chat with Deaconess Foundation to talk about what it took to get the fund started and what will be happening next with it. So in 2026, the fund will be completely housed within Forward Through Ferguson. Instead of Deaconess acting as the fiscal manager, those funds will be coming and dispersed from Forward Through Ferguson, and we will continue to create a fully endowed fund. This was basically a pilot in 3 cycles. What will it take now to create an endowed fund to continue that work? And that's what we're going to be diving into next year. The other thing that we did in addition to that discussion, which I do want to mention, that chat is now on the Forward Through Ferguson YouTube channel as well. Ja worked very, very hard to get a lot of the segments from the Racial Equity Summit up and going. So if it was filmed and taped, it is now on our YouTube channel. And so thank you, Ja, for making sure that was taken care of before tonight. The other thing that we did was that we also hosted a meet and greet. I forget what did we call it? We called it an expo, where you had the grantees present who were able to talk about what they did, what the fund meant to them, what their work continues to be. And next year at first quarter, we'll be issuing the reports, the evaluative, as well as some good information and discussion from the grantees about what the experience meant to them, so that the community can understand why it's necessary to increase and continue this investment. I don't think that was supposed to start playing, was it? Our additional work areas. I'll let Sarah take over.
Okay, I am back. Thank you all for bearing with us as we're working on this hybrid session. So throughout the year, our team is invited to speak at events as guest speakers, moderators, panelists, both locally and nationally. So here's a list of a few events where we've been present this year. If you all do have opportunities where you would be interested in hearing about us, please reach out. We would love to work with you and partner with you. Those of you in the room, you'll see our impact report from last year, and that will have a full list. So tune in for Q1 of 2026, where we'll have a full list, but here's just a snapshot of where we have been this year. Oops, sorry. I might need to stop screen share for a second to get rid of this video. Zoom, folks, is my screen sharing? No? Okay. Just one moment. All right, how about now? Yes, great. So we talked a little bit about the Racial Equity Summit. The videos that are virtual that were played at the summit are all on our YouTube. So I think Ja will be sharing that in the chat. If you're on Zoom, we will also send it via email so you all have access. But if you are unfamiliar with the summit, it launched in 2019 and has been a biannual event, so it happens every other year. And the summit had always been organized by a group of volunteers from several organizations. And over the last few years, the summit had really grown, and there was a need for a group to really take it on and lead the planning for it, to be very intentional effort to make sure that we're reaching the larger community, that the content aligns with moving along the path to racial equity, and that there's a safe space built for the conversations and reflections that happen during this time. So this was a very huge undertaking, but it was the first time that Forward Through Ferguson served as the lead host and the planner. And it took a lot. Every single team member had a role, and we planned for over a year. We met every week. We put a lot into it to be very intentional about every piece and make sure that the setting was set to be what we really envisioned and what the community had been asking for and wanted. We had a total of 33 breakout sessions, and Prentice was the keynote. The general theme related was healing and joy, which is really, really important in the equity work that we do. Here's just a snapshot of, what attendees had to say. We got a lot of great feedback. We had over close to 100 presenters, lots of vendors. I think we have some of them in the room with us today. And then, of course, volunteers, which we, as a small team, could not have done this without volunteers. So really, really appreciative of that. And then just a couple of testimonials from attendees as well. There were lots of lessons learned for our team as this was our first time putting it together. So we're really thinking about how to re-envision what the next summit looks like. If you are here today or whether you're on Zoom, and if you have some ideas or thoughts that you didn't submit in the evaluation, please connect with us. We would love to learn more as we're planning for the next summit. On the development side, we have been really focused on building intentional community. So this year we launched our Partners in Change series where we had a panel featuring Ferguson Commission members. And we're looking to host more frequent events in 2026. So stay tuned for that. There is an interest form on our social media that you can fill out if you would like to be notified specifically for any of these events. But please tune in. We'll definitely be having more in 2026. This year, we were also selected as the nonprofit that was the recipient of donations from Ben & Jerry's Free Cone Day. We're also working to partner with more businesses. We have some things in the works for early 2026. But again, if you are a business or looking to partner with a nonprofit or you might have some ideas, please connect with us. We'd love to get more involved with you as well. And then lastly, we have been talking about our annual reports. We started doing these about 2 years ago, and we're really excited that we've continued them. So those in the room, we do have our last report at the tables. Our reports usually come out at the end of Q1 and end of Q1 of each year. So 2026 will be a little bit different because it is FTF. This year was FTF's 10-year anniversary. So stay tuned for another 10-year look back, which we've been talking about. And then in the reports on your tables, we do have our financials available. We also have them available on Candid. If you go to the Documents tab, you'll be able to see our latest 990 and audited financials. And yes, they are available on Candid. And now I will pass it to Anissa to talk about board and governance and what is next.
So we always promise that we're not going to keep you long. So we're not going to keep you long. But coming up in 2026 in Q1, quarter one, we will be going out for board recruitment. As you can imagine, it's not an easy lift to be a board member, but it's not exactly a hard lift either. We try to work collaboratively and make it worthwhile. And if you were at the summit, you did see quite a few of our volunteers were actually board members, and they often serve as ambassadors for us. So the initial commitment is for 3 years with an additional option for another 3 years. And if anyone would like to discuss that with us, more than welcome to touch base with me. I am having discussions with people who are interested. It's not a commitment to just have that discussion to see what is required. More than happy to do that. But they do serve as ambassadors to FTF, and there are some joint staff and board trainings that we do as well. And we've got some really unique things that we'll be planning next year as well. What's next? So there's some things that I want to discuss that I probably should have started at the beginning. If you look around the room, there are fewer of us that are here than were here last year. And part of what we're seeing is what's happening with a lot of organizations where in order to continue the work, we had to contract. The funding just is not the same. The relationships are not always still the same as well. There are several individuals and entities who would like to continue to work with us. And just because either pressures within their organizations or their own climate of financial instability just can't do it. And so with that, we had to make a hard decision that we still are feeling the waves of, because it's not an easy thing. It's not anything that we ever want to do. But if we are to be here beyond the now 10, because we were launched in December of 2015, if we are to be beyond this 10-year mark, there were some things that we had to do. So we have to streamline, we have to contract. But some of the things that we're excited about in 2026 is we referenced the creating the first responder alternative advocacy plan. So MODIV has done a lot of work in terms of gathering data, convening the roundtable to really see what that looks like. And that advocacy plan, thanks to our partners at Missouri Foundation for Health, will be released by Forward Through Ferguson next year. We also will be co-releasing a 10-year a 10 years later report in partnership with the Urban Institute. We're very fortunate that we have friends at that organization who looked at what they had available in resource and decided that it would not be robbery to take a look back and to work with us. The narrative and some of the work on that is actually going to be done by the same individual who helped with the narrative and some of the outline for the original Ferguson report. We will be releasing the Transforming 911 City data write-up, as Ja mentioned. And we're also going to be taking the lessons that we learned in that pilot of the Racial Healing and Justice Fund to create the fully endowed fund. It's going to be smaller. The fundings, we're still working out what those amounts will be, but it definitely will not be the same number that we did. But part of what we're doing is taking those lessons, learning how to be more efficient and effective in how we provide that resource, but also tweaking the model of who can give and who we're expecting to be in partnership with the fund. Additionally, we'll be exploring future racial equity summit formats. As Sarah mentioned, we start planning a year ahead. So by this time last year, we had already signed the contract for going to University of Missouri, St. Louis. They were excellent partners. They made it somewhat easy for us to kind of step into a place as first time event planners. We plan small events, but nothing of that sort. And so we're excited to start looking at what the formats may be for us not next year, but the year after next. But that also means that we're going to start doing that work next year. And then finally, as always, you are welcome to ask any questions. We're all here if you want to dive into something more particular. As mentioned, the Transforming 911 document is at different tables. We have a microphone that we can pass around for everyone, but hopefully there's some good information and questions that you all may have that we're more than open to answering and having a good discussion with you tonight. And as always, I mentioned that we contracted a little bit. That does not mean that we cannot accept your donations. So you see it on your screen for those of you on Zoom, but there also is a means to go to the link that is referenced on the screen, as well as to mail us. And we always welcome your donor advised funds as well. But with that, we'll open the floor for any questions you might have and see what conversations we can have with you tonight.